thank you all for coming to Melana Bontrager's artist / exhibition walkthrough. We were trying to do things a little bit different, shake it up, and this seemed a lot more fun than sitting and just listening to us talk. So feel free to ask questions. We want this to be interactive. But yeah, I think I wanted to, I'll start by we were very excited for the show. Melana's body of work, Pentimenti, I think is really fantastic. It follows this through line of since I've known your work, of looking at the man-made environment and natural environment and kind of the intersection in between. And I think it really taken a turn with this body of work in that exploration. So, as we go, honestly, feel free to ask questions, jump in. My first question for you, to kick things off, is, we'll get to that. So we can start with, tell us who you are and what you're about. But I think I really want to start with what made you decide to start painting? How did you get into this?
We're saying like way back?
Yeah, or whenever. What is the impetus between you started this body of work and you kind of want to ask why?
Okay, so we need how did we shift into this?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I thought we were going to go back to second grade. I took art classes now. My teacher was named Charlie Brown, though, and I just think that's the coolest thing. My second grade painting teacher was Charlie Brown, legit. So anyway, shout out to Charlie.
Move ahead in time.
Yeah. Okay. So why this body of work?
Yeah.
So I put this in my statement as well, and maybe it's a little bit more eloquent in my statement. We'll see. You can read it later if you want. But so I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher of art at a small private school on the east side, and it is a classical school, which means that it's very important to connect to where we've been and to go back to kind of those classical roots and those thoughts, and to explore where we've been, not just current. So there's a big push for that in the education, and part of the students' experiences is that between their junior and senior year, they take a grand tour to, we go to Athens, we go to Rome, Florence, and London. It's spectacular. It's an incredible experience. And this past year, I got to go with my son, who is this year a senior. And so, and with people that he has known over the years and that I have watched grow up. And so, as I was starting, that was last June, as I was starting this body of work, I then kind of paused and went on this trip. So I had started creating pieces that were exploring the idea of history, the idea of where have we been, just as humans. My work often delves into the connection between humans and what do we experience as humans and what brings us together and what are commonalities. And so in various ways, that's kind of what I'm often exploring. So in this situation, I was kind of thinking about, okay, history and where we've been and what we keep throughout time and what we discard and what we take with us, and personally, but also, looking at generations before. So starting to think about that. And then I went on this trip and got to experience things that I had been fortunate enough to see when I was young, having traveled to Europe in high school myself, but that was a few years ago. So it's been a little while. But then going with this kind of next generation and getting to see these things through their eyes and getting to see what they were having, what aha moments they were having, and how they were connecting to history was really powerful for me. I did not go into this trip expecting that I was going to get material from that and go in this direction, but that kind of launched me into the rest of the work that you see here. So pretty much the only piece that was close to completed before I went was the large piece on the back wall. And that still got it got a little renovation when I got home, but everything else was created since then. And so it kind of comes out of that experience, but as it, I think, really connects to the whole of that idea of through line and history and what we leave behind, take with us. Yeah.
And that might answer my question, because I was wondering if seeing it through their eyes had an impact on your color palette.
I think
it looks like you already had that knowing.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Because everything's so vivid, that's how I tend to think of young people seeing things.
I think it definitely played a part, and I actually, Judith can attest to this. Can I tell our stories? This was okay, and I will tell ours too, because Leslie also was a part of this. So I had, shortly after I got back, I had this color palette. The way I select a color palette is I have base out of the 2 colors, but I usually keep myself to about 4 or 5, and then everything else comes out of that. So it's very much, that's how I keep my color palette for any given body of work consistent. And then also that's how I just kind of keep myself challenged within that. So personal challenge. But when I came back, I think I was using these colors, but it was like, ooh, a little bit of green or a little bit of orange. And I had these pieces, they were very neutral. Actually, all these pieces along the wall here originally were very neutral. And they were quite, I don't know, could we say tame is nice, because it doesn't make them sound as horrible as they were. But Judith walked in to do a studio visit, and she's like, "This is like these are you were honest, which was beautiful and what I needed. But they weren't right. They weren't pushed. They weren't alive. They weren't doing what they needed to do. And I hadn't pushed them far enough, and they were very neutral. And so when I went back in and just really went at it, they got brighter. And I think as I journal while I'm creating, so journaling is a big part of my process. And that I think as I journaled and came to, wow, this is really, like, this did affect me, this experience, and it also continues, like the ideas continue to affect me. I think I didn't think about it that way, but I think the colors did get brighter and stayed brighter, and that probably is a connection.
And because I know I'm familiar with your work,
yes.
It's so much brighter.
Yes. Yeah. It is. So yes, and then my other, because I could tell both stories. So Leslie, my dear friend, who also shows here at the gallery, has fabulous work, and she has a piece in the back, so go see her work too. Yes. But she came over and just did a studio visit, and she had wonderful things to say, and she's so supportive. And then we were standing and looking at this piece, which does not look anything like it did. I mean, you wouldn't even know. But we're standing in front of it, and she finally, just in her very sweet way, goes, "It doesn't work." And I knew it. Like, you know, when you know you need to hear something and someone's willing to say it, for both of you, I'm so thankful. It wouldn't have pushed me where I needed to go if I had been willing to say something. So that's important. And this piece then went through a major transformation and lots of work, but I think came out on the other side. I'm happy with it. So,
well, so you kind of touched on it, but a question that was asked is, when you start painting, are there any rituals that you're following to get yourself into the painting? And it sounds like you journal a lot, which
yes.
You and I have talked a lot about how that has popped into your work.
Yeah.
Are there any other kind of getting you in the mood for painting rituals that you follow?
I am very ritualistic. I don't think of myself as that kind of person, but when I think about it in terms of what I do have a system of what I do. I love underpainting and what it gives to the work, and so that means adding layers of color underneath what you eventually see. A lot of times I start with really bright colors, and it's more of I would say almost a meditative covering of the panels. They're all wood panels. Where I'm mixing these bright colors and I'm just covering. And that usually, I often listen to music. It's very, it's not a thinking process as much as a feeling process, which sounds a little woo-woo, but it's just, it's getting into that and creating. So I start with these panels that are just covered with movement of color, and then I'll move into drawing what I think might be the start of my compositions. then it kind of goes from there in layers. But so yeah, and then back and forth. And the more I use a drawing medium with the paint, which is something I've been doing for a lot of years, but the more I do it, the more they become very unified. It's not so much like color book. I think that's kind of how I started, where I draw the lines and color in the lines, which is fine. But it has become much more an interaction and a dialogue between the materials currently. So there's that, and then so I just kind of weave back and forth between those two, and things get rolled over. I call it rolling over something, because I keep a roller, and if there's a part of the painting that it's not working, I have to be willing to roller it. So out comes the roller, and we start again and draw, and then that just creates interest for the layers, I think. And the longer I'm doing this, the more I'm working that way, where my original composition is often not a whole lot like what it comes out to be. Like, it just all becomes very metaphorical.
How do you make the decision of what to, because you're very considered in what you're revealing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide which tiny little part I'm going to show you now?
Yeah, I think that's super intuitive for me. It's one of those things that it has to just, in my mind, it has to work. I don't know if I have to like what's being revealed. I have to feel like it fits with the overall composition, whether it's color, whether it's texture, and then also the shape, because shape is really important to me. The shape has to work. And then again, I have this rule that if I start to fuss with it too long and it's taking my time and taking over, it has to get a roller. Work out the roller. So yeah, so it has to really work. I think I'm growing even more into that, and that's part of the process of this show is, and we've talked about that with, like, can every art piece, can I say, that's my work and I'm satisfied with where it is now? Could I always change something? Absolutely, because it's endless. But am I satisfied? Can it be who it is, what it is right now? And I think that's a fun place to be when you can say yes to more than one piece. That's a good accomplishment. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you finally get past updating the first layer and you're composing, I mean, there's like elements that seem like they're more like natural and elements that are more like constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like a scene in your mind or like a moment in time where you were at a place and that's like you're in a sense like reconstructing it like according to your perception of it, or like what is in your mind as you're like putting this together? Like, is it based off of something concrete and like temporal, or is it just like piecing together impressions from my life?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That actually is a great segue into shall I walk over here?
Yeah.
Because our next stop is what you're talking about. So I will stand here, and you can actually, because I'll talk about these. So in the past, probably my earliest actual place of inspiration was the West Coast, and more specifically the Oregon West Coast. I have dear family there that I connect with. They are artists. That was kind of my first experience of what does it look like to be an artist as a life, career choice, and so very influential to me. But growing up in the Pacific Northwest, the combination of the rock formations kind of speak to me about humanity. Metaphor is big for me, but I would say rock formations for a lot of years have been that for me. The idea of time and weather and those elements changing the way that rocks are structured, the way that they rest on each other or interact or crumble, whatever, and that being very metaphorical for humanity and the human experience, and being our environment affecting us, our relationships affecting us, all the things in our life affecting us, changing us, inviting us into what we look like. And then in that, the idea of redemption. So something in nature being crushed by elements. I've always been fascinated with those, that what comes out of that crushing and how that it can be crushed and it can be beautiful, and there can be something new and different and unexpected that comes out of that. And so with that redemption, I think also mirrors humanity in that, you know, those things that we often think are breaking, there is room for redemption in that. So that said, this body of work, and in the past, I have used structure as a way to explore urban settings. In this urban setting where we live, we also have incredible nature and beauty around us. So that's kind of a unique urban setting in that we are very close to both nature and urban challenges, wonderful things, all of that. So in the past, I've done it as kind of they've been together, but not as merged as these. And so when I create, I have not ever created out of this is the setting, but I'm always pulling. So this idea of the Oregon coast, or the coast in general, and the tide pools and the rock formations and the coming and going of the tide and the changing of the rock formations with weather, also mirrored with these structures then from this European experience that I just had, with these old structures that have lasted through time, and what has happened with them, and how do we perceive them, and what does that, like, what do we do with that? And so these pieces, these three, and then the one on the back wall here, are based off of a church called St. Dunstan in the East in London. It's in the financial district, just right in the middle of all these, you know, just high-rise buildings. But it's a church that was built in the 1100s, went through some decay and falling apart, and then was rebuilt again, and then halfway burned down in the fire of 1666 in London. Was rebuilt again, and then it got bombed in World War II. So it has a history of being built up, and, you know, just this kind of ebb and flow. And now it is this incredible garden that they have cultivated. It is actually a garden that you can go in and sit and sketch and journal and be, and it is really striking, the passage of time mixed with this architectural structure that still has a spire, it still has some walls, but we likened it to, if you've seen the Narnia films, the ruins of Cair Paravel. It has that feeling of these beautiful trees and vines growing up through it. And so that inspired these. None of these look like what it looks like. I mean, there's no water, you know, but it's an attempt to kind of combine those ideas and those inspirations together. And so likewise, this with the Pantheon in Rome, the idea of the oculus and being this kind of overarching, almost like an eye. And I just thought that you know, that mixed with something that also kind of ebbs and flows, the ebb and flow of time, and what is constant and what remains, and then you know, what changes, what stays, and what is new, and that. So, did that answer your question? That was a long answer.
No, it did answer my question, absolutely, and I can see it. I mean, I can see exactly what you mean in painting.
You had touched on time a little bit, and we had talked about this a little bit before, and it's in your statement a little bit too. You're thinking about time in these paintings as well, as a different layer in the Pentimenti. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that would kind of be paired a bit with the idea of place and not exactly knowing where in time or where in place these are. And I think you and I talked about this just the other day, where it kind of was like, could this be an old, maybe you said something about it in the talk about the art of the week, but kind of this idea of like, where are we, and does that place exist, and where is it in time? It doesn't really give a solid place in time. It has been, but it also is now. And so I think that playing into also the, you know, is what plane is this, or what, is this just a reflection, or is this a kind of a portal into another space? And that with, playing with depth also, and where does that go? So that's also something I'm thinking about. I'm intrigued by things that look like something that they're not. So, is it a reflection? I think that this one kind of up toward the top, that idea, and there's some in the one back here too, of just like, are these tide pools, and is that a reflection, or is that a portal to another place, or are we looking back this way, or are we down below and looking up? It's trying to play with that tension a little bit so that it's not quite so knowable, and that's also my way to get you to stay and look at it for longer. If you don't know immediately, please stay. It's an invitation. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Just from the artistic living among us.
I hardly think you're artistic.
Obviously, a lot of your paintings there's a very strong horizontal component left.
Yeah.
Is that temporal, or is that spatial, or is that different different levels of perception? Or I'm sure there's a backstory
Yes.
to it.
Yes. Maybe all of the above. I am starting to play a little bit with the idea of, like when in the picture plane, if your subject is further away, it gets smaller, right? So that's like a way in that two-dimensional plane that we create the illusion of depth. And so my thought in some of these was like, oh, what if we kind of like took this is our plane, and we just propped it up this way instead of playing with the size to make that. What if the layers were kind of this idea of moving in space, but we're moving it this way when it is going? Does that make sense? It sounds like I'm getting really trippy. I'm not that smart, so it's not. But it's basically just the idea of kind of propping it up.
That's pretty much what I thought.
Is it? Oh, good. Okay, we're trying.
That was a perspective thing.
Yes.
But not obviously in the more ancient sense rather than the Renaissance.
Oh yeah, maybe. Okay, so I'm channeling it. See, it's working. I'm channeling these. But so the idea of the other thing is you don't get to see it all. If it's going this way and it's back here, you're seeing less of it, right? So if I prop it up, then I can be in all of these planes at once in my experience. And I'm not missing anything.
And it's darker in the back.
It is darker in the back. Yeah. So
that would be if you took it and went up and the side of the back.
Yes, it's gonna, as it recedes, it's gonna be darker and further away. So yeah, that wasn't even intentional. So look at that. Thank you for bringing that out for me.
I like this talk about perspective because I think it leads into the little guys.
Yeah.
The series of little paintings that if we talk over there.
Yes.
They kind of have almost a lack of perspective, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I drew them, I stuck them all together so they were like one big square, and then I drew my composition on them. I did my underpainting first, and then I drew my composition on them, and then I took them apart and problem solved each one until I was happy with the composition individually, not as a part of the whole. So the exercise was to, one, create these little moments that were at one time part of a bigger piece. So individualizing those, but making them something that could each of them stand alone, that didn't need the other one. So they're related, but they're not necessarily, they don't have to have each other as far as that goes. So, and it was really, I think I did these after I did the two larger ones, and then I was starting these pieces with the St. Dunstan work, and I felt like I needed some problem solving skills. I felt like I really wanted that, and so that's where this one kind of came in, and I just wanted to figure out like what are these individual moments, and how can I both aesthetically and collectively make them work. And so that's kind of
So if you put the 9 together, is there a continuation of the branches from one to one?
Sometimes, yeah. like I said, I problem solved each one of them individually, but they do, like if you put them in the 1 through 9, they will connect to each other. Yeah.
Have you ever done something where you've done a larger piece and then cut it up and worked with it afterwards?
No, this is the closest that I would have done to that, since I drew it and started them together and then pulled them apart that way. So
I'm interested in the negative space in these, and I don't know what the question is, but
so just speak to the negative space.
There's this negative space that I find really fascinating because there's an echo of the archways of those kind of Gothic arches, and then the trees that they echo it a little bit. But then there's also these same shapes in the negative space of the trees that echo the rock formations. So I guess the question is that something you were intentionally thinking about, or is that just coming out of the vocabulary of your work?
I don't know. Are you telling me I'm
I don't
consistent?
know. Yeah, you're very consistent.
Well, okay, so I'll tell you the story of my trees. I started teaching high school art 4 years ago. Before that, I had homeschooled my kids for a few years, but I had not ever taught in front of a classroom. And so figuring all of that out and being organized as a teacher, it's not my strong suit, and it has been an amazing learning curve. But one of the super cool things is that I learned from my students, which is really fun. And a couple of years ago, I had a student who did something similar to this with a pattern on the ground of trees. And I was super intrigued. So we talked about this, and I said, hey, at the time I was painting a set for a theatrical production, and we needed trees. And so I said, I love this idea that you came up with. Can I kind of riff on this and go with some trees for this production? And so he said yes. And so I kind of, with these, I really let the trees go, because they want to be there, and I feel like I have to control them sometimes because they will just take over. I felt like they needed a place to be able to take over, and so that's kind of what happened here too. But yeah, the negative space is really important to me. I think that there's something compositionally very powerful about that, and also about knowing, that it's trees, but it is very abstracted in the sense that it is like a shadow on the ground, or like a photograph that you flip into black and white and blow it out so that you can't see those in-between places or the connecting places. It just becomes one shape altogether. So I don't know, does that seem to it? Okay.
I'm curious about the frames on these smaller ones and the bigger ones wrap around.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at the sides and how wrapping, so I'm just curious what the thought process was on that.
Yeah, good question. I have always felt like the sides of paintings get neglected. The sides of my paintings are very important, and I have them built in 3-inch depth for a purpose, because I think that's important. It's a part of my process. But with these, because I did them on a smaller piece, and because I started with that, I put them together, and so they were kind of connected on the sides, so they didn't start wrapping around. And then I started thinking, well, okay, so then what would that look like to, it didn't feel right to paint the sides of them. It felt like that was maybe a little exclusive. I'm talking like they have a feeling. I'm sure they but yeah, these felt different to me, maybe because I had painted them on smaller panels intentionally and just exploring that connection to each other. I thought maybe I would display them in that series of 9 originally, and then the Matthew Olds, who makes my panels, I was talking to him, and so we kind of brainstormed about these, and I thought, closing them in that, it allows them to be their own little moment, which felt like that's what, with my panels, I want them to breathe and keep going. Like they're inviting you into, where might this go? And I think that wrapping around, that continuation of the story lends to that. But with these, with them being a moment, I felt like, maybe it's kind of a protection, like a they're in a box, they're in a little space. And so it just kind of worked in my mind with what I was trying to do with them.
The last 2 pieces that you were creating to show, I think show how you continue to evolve as an artist. And so we'll talk over it with these guys. And I would love to hear your thoughts on how this evolution took place.
I think, okay, so I did already talk a little bit about this shift, and I think these show more of that, what we were talking about, what you brought up, Monty, with this this depth, but then kind of flipped up. So that's what I'm kind of exploring with these two. But also, I've gotten really into the structures, and I've been digging in that way. And I kind of felt like I wanted to back up and revisit kind of what that looks like minus the structural. However, with these, I did a lot of journaling on the actual panel underneath here. I did a lot more with the underpainting. And so some of what's coming through is actually that's kind of what the whole thing looks like underneath. Is there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of mark making, there's a lot of color all under there. And so these, I think mostly kind of coming back to, am I still working in the same way? Am I, even if I pull these structures officially out, is my work still moving in that direction of exploring the depth and the landscape and the interaction of shapes and all of that? And I also am really fascinated with clouds. We have fantastic clouds here, don't we? It's pretty incredible. I've started taking pictures of clouds and just... and so I thought, well, you know what, it does matter to me that I keep growing and exploring. And so these kind of like sprays of, I don't know, sea spray or clouds or something have kind of started eking in. And so this one, I just kind of thought, let's just go for that and jump into it and see what happens there. And then same with this one, just the same, the rock formations and the interaction of shape and space and reflection or other planes and all of that. So we'll see. There might be more clouds coming. I feel like that's if there's more things coming, it might be clouds.
Yeah, that was actually the next question.
Is that what you want to say?
What's next?
I don't feel like, oh, okay, I wrapped this up and this body of work is done. I feel like I do have another show coming up in May in Denver. So I am fast turnaround on to the next thing, which is good and bad, right? You need sometimes you need a breather, but also it's good to stay in it. So I feel like I haven't felt a need to switch into something different. I'm kind of continuing that which feels good. I mean, there's not a shortage of what goes on in my head, I guess. My favorite complementary color scheme or relationship is the orange and blue. And sometimes that ebbs a little bit, and sometimes this show, it's hello. But I'm not sure why we went so bright. I liked your question earlier, and that's something to think about, is just the experience of it. I've had people tell me this show feels really joyful, and I don't know if it's because the weather is what it is right now, and this is not what the weather is right now, so kind of an interesting choice for this time of year. But I dress like this most often, and I'm very neutral in what I choose, and then I paint like this. And I love black and white and neutral artwork, and I paint like this. I don't know, it chooses me, I think, and so I just go with it. I've tried to create neutral pieces, and then we end up like this. So I guess I'm just supposed to. Is that kind of what it means? Do what I'm supposed to, okay?